What's up, everybody? Welcome to an extra special, extra mile episode of the PlayStation Drive. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the man himself, Matt Sawinski. Matt, how are you doing on this lovely, lovely Friday afternoon, good sir?
I'm doing swell, my friend. I am ready for the weekend. It's been a week, but I'm excited to talk about some cars here with you today. How you doing?
I'm also doing well. I'm also excited to talk about cars, believe it or not. I mean, we've got Drive in the title. There's a car on our logo and on our layout. So you would assume that we maybe talk about car games all the time, but we don't. But we're here to talk about Gran Turismo 7 today because, you know, now that we've had the game for almost a month now, we want to do a little review discussion and talk about the game, kind of talk about our full thoughts on it and where we think it's going and whether or not you, dear listener or viewer, should pick this game up. So real quick kind of disclaimer before we get into all things prior is that our codes were actually provided to us by PlayStation Canada for free for the purposes of review. So we want to say thank you to our friends over at PlayStation Canada for providing a copy of the game for us in order to review that. We always like to disclose that information when we get codes from developers. And also, you know, I wanted to kind of talk about where our progress is with the game, because we always like to also disclose before going into any kind of review discussion how far along we are in the game. So, Matt, let's start with you. How far are you in Gran Turismo 7 at the time of this recording?
Yeah, so for myself, I'm probably somewhere around 12 hours in. In terms of like the cafe progression, I'm at somewhere around like 24 or 25 missions done out of the, I think we mentioned 39 total.
So you're about halfway through. Yeah.
So a little more than half. So that's roughly how much time I've been with it. How about you, Ryan?
So I've actually spent, now I looked at my log this morning. I spent 32 hours with the game in total. I've beaten the game. In fact, I've done a lot of end game stuff as well, because there is kind of, you know, a grind after you basically finish all the menu things in the main campaign to basically earn more cars and, you know, do more races. And also there's a lot of modes outside of just the campaign itself that I haven't finished yet. Like I've finished all of the license tests, which we'll talk about later, and finished all the music modes on gold, like basically got gold for all of them. But I haven't finished all the mission modes yet. So that's one thing that one hole that I still have to fill. But for the most part, I finished pretty much everything you can do in this game at this point. So yeah, I'm well versed in this game. But also real quick, I also want to ask Matt, because I'm curious about this as well, which we didn't ask about yesterday, so I'm putting you on the spot with this one. What's your history with the series? What's your history with Gran Turismo? This is your first game. Have you been playing them for a while? What's your history with the series?
Well, I have a long and storied history with Gran Turismo that started about a month ago when I started playing Gran Turismo 7 for the first time. I've never really been big on Gran Turismo. It's always been something that I've kind of like seen in the periphery, but something I've always been curious about. So yeah, this is my first go. This is my first Gran Turismo. What about yourself?
So I'm glad that we actually have someone that's new to the series on the show with me, because I'm a long-term Gran Turismo player. I've played every single Gran Turismo game, including the PSP one, basically going all the way back to PlayStation 1. That's actually where I got my start with it. It was one of my very first PlayStation 1 games, and I played that game to death. I mean, I know my brother Kyle listens to the show, and he could attest to the fact that I put hours upon hours upon hours into Gran Turismo, like customizing all kinds of cars. And I think I talked about it on one of the shows before, where I created a 1997 Nissan Skyline that I tuned so that it would go from 0 to 300 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds, but it couldn't turn left. So, you know, you have all the power in the world, and it had, you know, 999 horsepower is maxed out for what it allowed you to do for maxing out horsepower on a car in a game. But man, it just couldn't turn left. So hopefully it was great for races where you didn't have to turn, Matt. If it was a straight line, you'd win every time. But or
just races where you only ever had to turn right. It has two very good specificities. Forget words. Continue.
I mean, if this was a NASCAR game, Matt, it'd be the best car in the game. But
there you go.
It's not a NASCAR game. It's Gran Turismo. So besides high speed ring, you didn't really have many uses for that car. But I love tweaking all kinds of all the cars in the games and stuff. And I'm not really like a car person in real life. In fact, like racing games aren't even like my main genre, I think, like that. But like Gran Turismo as a series has always stuck around with me, and it's always been like one of my personal favorite PlayStation franchises of all time, which is, again, weird for me to say that, but it's one of those things where it's just like, yeah, if I look back at all my memories from PlayStation, from previous consoles, like Gran Turismo is definitely up there as one of my most played series. So
Nice.
I'm well versed with Gran Turismo. So I'm excited to talk about Gran Turismo 7 today. So let's jump into it. So first of all, for folks that don't know, who've never played a Gran Turismo game before or haven't really played this one, so Gran Turismo 7 is basically a sim racing game. So don't think something like Forza Horizon or Burnout, but more something like, Forza Motorsport or one of the like F1 games or NASCAR games or something like that. Yes, I know it's not a NASCAR or an F1 game, but it's in that simulation direction, essentially, is how I would kind of quantify it. But the thing about Gran Turismo that's different from a lot of other racing games that I've noticed that are on the market is this one in particular is very single player focused. Yes, don't get me wrong, you can play a lot of single player in stuff like, Forza Horizon, for example, but I really feel like these games have always put the single player experience more at the forefront versus the multiplayer experience. And I actually think Gran Turismo 7 is much more in that direction. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the single player content. And I just don't think we've really played a lot of online multiplayer, right, Matt? Like you haven't really tried the online at all?
No, I haven't. I'm just afraid of getting decimated online, so I've stayed away from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. Like I've played some online. I've played some online matches, and I mean they've all run well, and it's been fun to kind of race kind of my custom tuned cars against other people's custom tuned cars. But beyond that, I'm not really a huge multiplayer person anyways, so I wasn't chomping at the bit to get to it, but it worked well. So, I mean, I don't have any problems to report with the multiplayer at least, and it's definitely a lot of fun. So we're mostly going to focus on the single player and talk about that. So first off, Matt, I got to ask you about this because this has been kind of a big topic of conversation with the game pretty much ever since kind of reviews dropped for the game and ever since people got their hands on this game. And that's kind of the game's balance and progression. So how do you feel about that Gran Turismo's balance and progression as far as do you feel it's overly grindy? What do you think? Do you think it pushes you towards microtransactions?
I think very much so, at least at the state of the game right now. Especially like I think the first few hours it kind of lulls you into a false sense of security where you're kind of like, okay, I have enough credits to be able to buy the next car that I need, or I have enough credits to kind of upgrade the car that I'm currently using. But I find that like very quickly that seems to go by the wayside, and you're kind of left grinding out races to try and get more credits, or like even if the credits that you do have, you pretty much zero out. Like there were a couple races where, especially towards later on in the game, where I would kind of go in with the car that I had, or the car that fit the specifications that the race needed. And I would just be like, and again, like I was driving fine. I'm not the best driver, but like I was driving fine. But like even sitting at somewhere like fourth or third, the people that were, or the cars that were in first or second were so far ahead that I didn't feel like I could actually catch them until I went back out, tuned my car more, which would essentially zero out my account. And then I'd kind of actually be able to get into the race. So there were some parts where I was like, I know that this is my fault. I am not driving the way that I should be. But there were other times where I genuinely felt like, no, the game is pushing me into upgrading right now, regardless of how many credits that you have. So it's also like the amount that you get is pretty much just diminishing returns. Like they have that your like daily workout or daily, tracking thing. And rewards seem to kind of go down after that. On top of the fact that like, you get these like
the roulette cards.
Thank you, roulette cards. Yes, you get these roulette cards when you complete certain missions. And like, I think just roughly off the top of my head, if I had to do it like out of 10, I think 9 out of 10 times I got like the lowest amount of credits possible out of those 5. And then like one time I got like a part. I had never got a car from it. I never even got like the middle tier of credits. And every time you do that, there's just a button that says, hey, you want to top up your credits even more? You want to hop over to the store? So I feel like that's kind of my biggest issue with this game, because there is a lot of positive, and the game itself is fantastic and it's well made. But I do feel like in its journey to kind of be, I guess, more of a live service title, I do think it needs work, because I don't think it's very fair right now. And I feel right now it's more predatory than it is anything else, especially with some of the UI and the way that things are laid out. And I hope that this is something that they can, that they'll change and work on. But I don't know, Ryan, am I off base here? How do you feel about the rewards economy?
So it's interesting because, again, since you're only about 12 hours in, I could definitely understand your comments, because I feel like the progression curve kind of does like it goes on a wavy line like this almost, where at the beginning of the game, like you said, it kind of lulls you into a false sense of security where, you know, you're not really having to grind for stuff. And I really felt between, you know, the 7 to 15 hour mark, like that's when the game got really grindy. But then I noticed towards the end of the game, when I was doing like the races that led you towards kind of the big championship towards the end of the campaign, I didn't feel that same grind, if that makes any sense, because what ended up happening and what I noticed is that the middle races, a lot of times what ends up happening is that they require you to have a car from a specific region at a specific, PowerPoint total, which is essentially what almost like a gear score or, you know, your level in something like Destiny, essentially, where like it matters basically. It takes like your speed and weight and all kinds of different stats about your car into consideration and kind of assigns a number to it. So I noticed that the middle races kind of require you to have a car. Let's say it has to be from France or Germany and has to, you know, meet, you know, at least 500 to 600 power points in order to even compete in the race. And I noticed that a lot more in the middle. Whereas towards the end of the game, what ended up happening for me is that I had a fleet of cars because I did all those individual races with all those requirements, that I didn't need to grind for more cars because I already had them from previous races. And then what I would do is just take the extra credits. Instead of buying a new car, I would tune up the cars I already have to basically their maximum capacity, essentially, which would then allow me to compete in the the higher level races without a problem, essentially. Whereas I felt like the middle of the game was really grindy. It really it felt like I was bottlenecked to the point where it was kind of pushing me towards microtransactions or grinding the same race 10 to 20 times over again to basically get, you know, the credits I need to, you know, buy a new car, buy new parts or whatever I need. So I definitely think the game's balance is a serious problem, but luckily this morning, on the day that we're recording this, we actually got a blog post over on the PlayStation blog from the creator of Gran Turismo over there. And he talked about a whole bunch of stuff. First of all, mentioning that our voices had been heard. And they're basically up until between now and April 25th, if you log into the game, you get a free $1 million in credits just added to your account as long as you just log in. But then starting in April, they didn't really say when, they just said sometime next month, they will be increasing the rewards in events in the later half of the world circuits by approximately 100%. So basically just doubling the amount of credits you get on certain circuits. They're also going to be adding high rewards for clearing circuit experiences on gold for all, as well as for bronze in particular. They're leaving the silvers the same for some reason. They're also increasing the rewards for online races if you do those, because that is an option as well. Rather than grinding the single player races, you can go grind online and get some money that way. They're also going to increase the quantity of used and legend cars given at a certain time, because the legend cars, for example, are some of the best cars in the game, but you only get 5 of them at a time, and sometimes you jump in and like 2 of the 5 of them are sold out. And you just have to wait till the next day before they refresh again. But then they also indicated that the ability to sell cars, which was always a big part of the older Gran Turismo campaigns, is coming at a later date. I don't know why they didn't have the ability to sell cars in the game at the beginning, but they did say that feature is coming. And I think that's going to be a welcome addition, because sometimes what ends up happening is that you end up with, especially with like prize rewards from, you know, completing different races, you sometimes end up with like 5 different copies of the same car, which doesn't help you because you can't sell them. And it's a reward that doesn't really give you anything. Like it's not only that, but it's a feel bad if you went out and bought that car and then, you know, win it in a race essentially, which did happen to me a couple times, especially in the early game. So I definitely am excited for that feature to come. And I think that's going to help, you know, balance things out. But that being said, I never really actually purchased any microtransactions, and I totally found myself, you know, being able to get through the game totally fine without them. But just be aware that you will definitely feel the pull, at least with the game in the state it's in now. So, Matt, what do you think about these changes? Do you think this is a good thing? Do you think this is a step in the right direction?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. I'm glad that they're addressing it already. I'm glad that they're communicating and, kind of outlining the roadmap in terms of, what changes they want to make and what quality of life stuff they want to do. The million credits is obviously going to be a nice bump in the short term. And hopefully things like, like you mentioned, selling cars is going to come sooner rather than later, because I do feel like these games have like a certain window where they need to succeed in a certain time frame for them to continue to be successful. So hopefully the car selling feature will come sooner rather than later, along with the rest of the rollout of some of this stuff. So I think it's definitely a good step. I love that they're listening and I love that they're communicating, which is welcome. What about you, Ryan? What do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I think this is going to help. But again, I think even though this doesn't fix everything, I definitely think it's going to help smooth out the middle grind that I referred to, where it shouldn't. You might have to grind a little bit still, but I don't think it'll be nearly as bad as what we played before. Where I found myself again going to like I think the third or fourth championship at that time and just grinding it over and over again, like 10 times in a row, just to again get the car that I needed for the next race and to make sure I had money to tune it up. So yeah, I definitely think it's going to help with that middle aspect, and I think that. Because again, this is a live service game. It's meant to, be updated over time. I definitely think that now that they've heard this feedback, that I think that this type of thing isn't going to happen again, or at least I'm crossing my fingers. I'm hoping that it doesn't happen again. But beyond that, the one thing that you did touch on earlier, Matt, was that I think the gameplay in this game is fantastic, and it's definitely the standout thing. And all taking all the currency stuff out of the game. I think this game, plays awesomely. Like it's really fun to drive around. I do think as well that it's really accessible to those who are new to the series, like yourself, where there are, a lot of racing options in there, and you can tweak all kinds of stuff. Because first of all, they give you kind of 3 baseline options off the start, basically like a super beginner mode where they even have like the car drives for you and you're only managing the gas on the car, but it brakes and it drives for you. It has a full racing line as well as a whole bunch of other features. Or likewise, you can go all the way to the max setting, like the most difficult setting where there are no assists or anything like that. And you're basically just getting the pure driving experience. And then from there, you can go into the menus and kind of tweak everything. I know, Matt, you had kind of expressed a concern about, how the menuing laid out. Just tell me about that real quick.
Yeah. So I appreciated the accessibility features, because at least for myself, I kind of played on when I first started playing, I used the drive line and I had the auto braking feature on, which is essentially as you get closer to a corner, there's like this red zone that'll pop up and it'll brake automatically for you to help you make the turn. And then after about 5 hours or 6 hours or so, I turned that feature off as well. What I do wish is that even though we have there's a bunch of accessibility features to help people into the game, I do wish just the kind of layout of them was a little bit more accessible, for the lack of a better word. Like some of these features are like dug deep into like certain menus at certain points. Like for example, to turn the auto brake off, you have to be like about to like basically loading in to a race, and it's one of just the final options you kind of have to go in and find through there, and it's not kind of on the main menu and just kind of the general settings. So I do wish some of those features were kind of just better consolidated perhaps in just kind of the general settings menu, and then if you wanted to tweak specific car stuff, I think that's fine. But I had to Google it and be like, how do I turn this off? Because I couldn't for the life of me find it. So while I super appreciate that they're there, and I think that they're great add-ons to kind of help people ease into the experience, especially for myself. The amount of times that I was just flying off the track because I wasn't turning properly, I was just gunning it into a turn, happened a lot. I just wish that they were kind of consolidated in a bit of a friendlier way. But I do love that they're there.
Yeah, there's a ton of menus in this game to go through with a ton of settings, and you really just have to explore a lot of it and kind of tweak the game how you want, including the option to go in the menu and turn off the 8-minute unskippable cutscene that comes up at the beginning of every time you turn the game on. So there is that to consider, especially because, again, the first time you load up the game, it's there because, again, this game is all about the history of cars and kind of teaching you about cars. And then one of the things we haven't talked about yet is kind of the menu system. And it's almost kind of like going to like an RPG quest board where it's like go race these 3 races and unlock these 3 cars, or go get one of the places in this championship, or hey, we've unlocked this new feature, go and do a specific thing in that new feature, such as, take a picture with your car, or, do one of the license tests, things like that. Like I thought that system was really cool. And then what was also cool about that is that with certain ones, like the ones where you're earning 3 prize cars, they'll usually have a certain theme to them. And then when you go back to the cafe, they'll talk about the history of those cars, which I thought was pretty cool. But Matt, what did you think about kind of the menu system and learning about all these cool cars?
Yeah, you know what? When we first saw the state of play and they were spending, a couple minutes on this feature, I was kind of like, I am never going to interact with this more than I absolutely have to. But as I actually played and kind of spent more time with the game, I actually think they nailed the delivery of this. Like it does, like the game is trying to help you learn a little bit about the history of cars. And, like yourself, I am not a car person whatsoever. For me, like, does it move? Does it stop? Does it play music? Okay, if it does those 3 things, I'm good. But they kind of nailed how like the length of these kind of learning segments. Like when you go to turn in your menu after you've completed it, you get 30 seconds of here's a brief history of some of these cars, with lots more that you could go learn about in other places. But I actually thought that they nailed it, especially like the mix of the music, the graphics, the kind of like serene, almost teaching environment they kind of create there. It's almost like a relaxing experience. I didn't feel like this stuff was being like shoved down my throat as much as it was, here's a little bit about what you just did. So I actually thought it was really, really cool. And it just kind of, I love the term that you brought up before with car PG, because that really is what it felt like. It was kind of like, here's just a bit of learning. Here's the next thing that you're going to doing. I never felt lost. So I actually really loved the cafe and the way that it was implemented.
Yeah, I thought it was actually a really smart way of keeping like the carrot on the end of the stick to make you, want to see more of the game, and to continue, doing all of the newest races. Because I felt like some of the older Gran Turismo games didn't do an amazing job of doing that and telling you kind of what the next thing you need to do is. Otherwise, a lot of the older games, a lot of times would be like, this feature has been unlocked or this race has been unlocked. And then you kind of just go do that. Whereas it felt like there was more structure to it using the cafe system. And not only that, but the game also gives you a lot of other history lessons as well. If you want to learn more about all these cars as well, if you go to Brand Central, which is a place where you actually buy a lot of the cars because you go to each of the car manufacturers there. Each of the manufacturers also has like an entire section dedicated to the history of their cars and of the company. And you can go learn more about them. Plus, there's also history and sections about like non-car manufacturers, like tire manufacturers, like Michelin and stuff like that too. So like you can go learn all kinds of stuff about cars if you want to learn, if like the cafe, the small tidbits kind of spark your interest and you want to learn more about this stuff. Like the game gives you the option to go learn about all the stuff if you really want to in game, which I think is a pretty cool thing as well. So there you go.
I agree.
Yeah. And beyond that, so the gameplay itself, the racing themselves, I think the races are fantastic. I think all the courses are great. As a longtime Gran Turismo fan, I loved the return of a lot of Gran Turismo 1 courses that some of them haven't been in the games for years, like Deep Forest, as well as Trial Mountain, High Speed Ring. Like all of those courses were really fun back on the PlayStation 1, and the new kind of reworked versions of them are great in this game as well. I'm still not a huge fan of the Nuremberg. I know it's a famous, racing location in real life, but that course is just way too long. Like it takes you 9 minutes just to do a lap. And then when you have a championship race that requires you to do 3 laps of it, I'm like, great.
Just half an hour.
It kind of bores me. Yeah, exactly. But if you do one race with it, Matt, you basically just fill up your entire daily workout thing with one race, essentially. So there's that. But yeah, my only nitpick about the driving itself and about the overall races is that almost all the campaign races do a rolling start, meaning that all of the cars are kind of, rolling rather than you all starting at a starting line. And sometimes what ends up happening is because of that, you're basically starting half a lap behind the first place person. And if your cars are spec'd out the exact same as far as stats are concerned, even if you drive perfectly, you're almost never catch up to them on normal difficulty. So it does make it kind of annoying that it's not just a normal, like everyone starts at the starting line and then you can just pass them as you go. Cause I feel like it's a little bit more fair that way, especially because in the championship races, Matt, later on, even if you come in first place in the race, you start back at 20th in the next race of the championship, even though, you've come in first. Whereas whereas the person that was in first, that was second behind you in the last race, starts ahead of you in first place again.
Right.
So you're basically catching up to him all over again, which felt a little off-putting to me, because again, why me, the first place racer in the previous race in this three race championship, always starting back in 20th place, while the second place person is starting at first every time. It seems weird to me.
That's really frustrating. Yeah, that must be really annoying. In terms of like the driving itself, I agree with you. I think it was like, it's really well tuned. It's a lot of fun. I think for me as a newer racer, the kind of the difficulty curve is definitely there, and it does kind of like, I think there are points when it's handled really well, and then there are some races that just felt like a giant difficulty spike, and then the race after that would again feel more in between kind of what the last two races that you just did. So I do think there are a couple spikes, but like I really did struggle until things kind of just clicked. Like I like between doing like the licensing exams and stuff and doing the actual races, there was a point that I hit where I was like, okay, I feel like I actually know what I'm doing, but it does take a bit, at least it did take a bit for me to get to that point. So just be aware that the difficulty curve is there, and it does pop up. But I thought the way that the game kind of eases you into it between the licensing exams and the races does usually a great job outside of those spikes. And just so I think we also have to just definitely bring up the DualSense, because the DualSense control, like the DualSense compatibility with this game is just fantastic. Like you really can feel the difference in the terrain that you're driving on top of the fact that like just even having that kind of like more modular control, at least it felt like more modular control over your gas in terms of like how far you're pushing it down. I thought the DualSense implementation was fantastic, and it felt so good. Like this is one of those times where it feels like it was there since inception, rather than just being kind of tacked on later, similar to Returnal, which I think is one of the best implementations of the DualSense yet. This feels like that level, like in my opinion. I think it feels really, really great. What did you think about the DualSense, Ryan?
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. I think you totally nailed it with what you said. In fact, like, it didn't really hit me until I did my first dirt race and kind of going over rocks and stuff, and then feeling like the difference with how the controller vibrates and how it feels like driving over dirt and over rocks versus, driving on a smooth track just really opened my eyes to the way that game worked. And then, of course, again, as you progress through the game and start learning more about, bettering your driving skills. Yeah. Like what you brought up about the gas is totally right. Or even brake in particular, where you always don't want to slam on the brakes. You want to, ease into the brakes a lot of times, or on certain corners, if you really need to slam on the brakes, it makes a big difference as well. And you also feel that difference as well. Like, it almost felt like I was pressing, pedals rather than, triggers on a controller, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But yeah. So overall, I really love the gameplay itself. I think it's awesome. But before we go and kind of start wrapping things up, I also got to talk about the other modes, because there's other modes beyond kind of the main campaign itself. We've got, first of all, let's start with the license modes. I think this is actually like my favorite mode in the entire game. And it always has been. Like, it's always been a mainstay in the entire series. Again, going all the way back to the very first Gran Turismo, where essentially you've got, 5 licenses you can earn throughout the game. And you earn them by basically doing a bunch of like mini games, where essentially the first set for your B license is just to, drive really fast and then stop on this line, or make this corner without, going off the track. But then they ratchet up in difficulty as you go through them, to the point where you get to the super license, where you basically have to do like an entire lap. And those are like really, really tough. But I love kind of the varying difficulty. The nice thing too is that you do need the licenses to finish all the races in the game, but you don't need to get all the licenses finished. You only need to get up to the national A license, and then from there, you can kind of finish everything in the game if you want to. So you don't have to totally finish the licensing. The other stuff is for, bonus credits and for pride, I guess. Or maybe they're going to add some stuff later that, requires like a super license or an international A license for some reason. But I really love the license mode. It really just taught me to be a better driver in the game and kind of to help me improve my skills with the game. And Matt, now that you're new to the series, now that you've played it, what do you think about the license system?
I thought this is a great way to kind of basically bake in a tutorial without it feeling like a tutorial. Like you mentioned, like it really does just teach you how to kind of tackle certain situations. And I love how bite-sized they feel. Like obviously they get longer as you go, as you learn more advanced techniques, but like even just the beginning of, like you mentioned, okay, go here and stop, or turn this corner in a certain way, or here's like a fast turn corner versus like a slow turn corner. Like the way that they kind of implement everything and make you really do feel like you're learning and progressing, not just, in terms of like campaign progression, but in your skill level actually playing this game. I love the fact that, like, again, just like the fact that the ghosts are entirely baked in.
Yep.
And it's just like, I can feel it. I could already be like, okay, I'm a second behind my ghost. Okay, time to restart. Like I already know I'm not gonna be able to, accomplish this, versus like, oh no, I'm ahead right away. What did I do differently? Hold on, let me think about this for a second. I think just that the licensing exams are really fun and like genuinely made me feel like I was progressing in my own ability as a driver.
Yeah, and if you ever get stuck on them, it actually has a really handy demonstration feature where they'll basically show you exactly how it's done. And in fact, on certain license exams, they'll actually break down when they get to, like, as you see the person drive and get to a certain point, the game will pause, and then you'll see a little speech bubble saying, at this point, you should be doing this. And then and they do that a couple more times before you finish. Like some of them are more straightforward and don't have that to them, but a lot of them are actually really detailed with what you're supposed to be doing. And it becomes less hand-holdy in that way with the demonstrations as you progress through the licenses when you get towards the end, where the demonstration is just you watch them race it and then you figure it out for yourself kind of thing.
I
thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I definitely used that a few times. Again, just because there are some situations where I'm like, how can I possibly do this any faster? I don't get it. And then like I was like, I wonder if there's something I can watch. Popped out. It was right there. I love that feature. I forgot about that. But yeah, I used that quite a few times just to be like, how am I supposed to do this? I loved it.
And not only that, but if you let's say you finish a bronze medal, it will say you a little blurb at the bottom and give you a little bit of feedback. But then when you go out of the race, but then you are still in the same license exam, if you click on the little license instructor's head, they'll actually give you feedback as to like, here are 3 things you could do differently that will help you get you that silver medal or that gold medal. So I love kind of the feedback that it gives you as well to kind of help tutor you into it. So we got licenses, which I think are awesome. But then if you want more of this style of gameplay, you've also got the mission mode, which unlocks later in the game as well, which is basically, again, like similar to the license exams where it's a bunch of like smaller tasks, not full races on specific courses. But it's not, trying to teach you anything. It's trying to challenge you more. And they're a little more difficult than the license tests. But I like this mode too. I think it's pretty cool. And again, it gives you more of that like bite-size racing action. So even if you don't want to do like a full, championship that sometimes can take you half an hour to do, jump in here, do a couple missions and pop out for the day and just have a fun time with it. Like I think that's really cool as well. Whereas Matt, I don't think you've played too much with this mode, right?
I haven't, no.
No. And then the last mode, which is the very first mode it actually gives you when you boot up the game, is the music mode. Because it's actually like a very arcadey mode where basically it presents you with a song along the top of your screen. And it basically is like survive in this race until the song ends and see how far you go. And then we'll kind of grade you on it essentially. And some of the songs are longer than others. They give you a specific car on a specific track that you're going on that kind of like fits the theme of the song, which is really cool. But along the top, as the song is playing, you kind of see the audio meter kind of bouncing up and down, and that's almost in time with how you're racing around the corners and stuff. So I love how that mode totally flowed together, and it's a mode that I think is just underutilized in this game because you only get 6 of those songs at the time of the launch, and you can basically finish them in 20 minutes, and then you pretty much never go back to it again. So if anything, I just want more of that. I thought it was a really fun mode, but what did you think, Matt?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really cool mode. And especially like given the songs that are there, and just also like I kind of want to touch on quickly, like the general soundtrack is just fantastic. The music in this game is just so good. I just think it nails it. It kind of, just kind of ties everything together in such a great way. But yeah, I thought this mode was really cool and I definitely want more of it.
Yeah, for sure. So, and they already said that there are more, music tracks coming. So I'm excited to see more of those and if they're paid DLC or not. But Matt, we should start wrapping up this conversation. So let's move on to overall thoughts. So overall, if I was a person walking up to you, on the street, let's say, and was asking, hey, I know you like PlayStation, even though I've never met you before. Should I buy Gran Turismo 7? What do you think the answer is to that question?
I think that right now I would still recommend this game just because of how mechanically tight it is and how I do feel like there's a good amount of content for kind of, what you're getting into. I do think that if there is a bit of learning to be done in terms of like also just, track racing versus something like, Forza Horizon. So I feel like this game is fantastic. It's really, really well put together. It is beautiful. The graphics are incredible. Like there's so much to love about this game that it kind of like when it trips and stumbles, it's a little bit more noticeable just because there isn't a lot to complain about. With like we mentioned, the rewards economy kind of being the standout, which they are working on, which is a nice touch. So I think that this is a recommend for me, but I would tell people to kind of do their research a little bit about the game and make sure that it is for them and that they are okay with some of the things around it, because there is a bit of learning to do here. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a really good take, Matt. And for me, I recommend this game as well. I think it's awesome. I mean, it's one of the best games I've played this year. And I mean, again, I'm not even a huge racing fan, but again, as someone who loves the series, this is one of the best entries in the series in a long time, despite all the balance issues. And if it didn't have the balance issues, honestly, this might even be my favorite Gran Turismo game if it wasn't for that stuff. And I will say, just, maybe if you're looking to buy it, maybe wait until after this April update comes out and then maybe jump into it then, because I feel like your campaign will just be more fun just waiting on this game. But you don't have to wait long for this because, like I said, like sometime next month we should have this. So I would maybe wait till that update's out first before jumping in. But then once this update's out, I think it's going to smooth out a lot of the issues that we had with this game. So I think it's a wholehearted recommend for me at that point then to check it out, because I think this game's awesome. It's definitely well worth it. Again, if you're looking for like a single player, racing game versus a multiplayer one, I think you're definitely going to enjoy this a lot more. Whereas if you're really looking for multiplayer, the multiplayer is still fun, but I think you're just going to get so much more out of it from if you're in the single player mindset, I think. So just be aware that that's a thing going into it. But Matt, we should probably get going. But before we go, Matt plugs go.
Yeah, you can find me over on Twitter at burnout_Matt, and you can always find us over at youtube.com/burnoutbrighter.
Very nice, my friend. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter at Yumi Capri's, on YouTube at youtube.com/Yumi Capri, on Patreon at patreon.com/Yumi Capri, and on podcast services around the globe. So from Matt Sawinski, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been an Extra Mile all about Gran Turismo, and we're out. The PlayStation Drive is fueled by patrons over at patreon.com/Yumi Capri. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you to our over 70 patrons, starting with our premium producers, Dallas Ford, Jonathan Brown, the man behind the music on the Xbox Drive and the Nintendo Drive. You can check out his new album, In My Element, over on Apple Music, as well as his website, and Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Phoenix Overdrive Extra Life team. Our platinum producers are Robbie Bobby Miller and Trucker Sloth, and our gold members, Argo, Brandon Myers, Dallas Robbins, Dano, Emily O'Kelly, Foolish Fuji, Joel Brooks, Jose Jimenez, Mac Time, Marcus O'Neill, Mr. and Mrs. Nasty Boots, RJ Kern, Skinny Matt, Tony Baker, and Xavier Reyes. Thank you all for all of your support, and if you're interested in joining the Patreon, head over to patreon.com/Yumi Capri and pick the tier that's right for you.